Welcome in, everybody, to the CFB Nation All-America podcast. I'm Bill Trocchi, senior editor at sportingnews.com, and I am not alongside Bill Bender, our national football writer at sportingnews.com.
It's kind of weird not seeing you guys together, man. It's kind of weird.
I am alongside two masterminds from Irish Breakdown, Bryan Driskell and Vince DeDario. Welcome in, Bryan and Vince. We're going to talk a little bit about Week 12 wrap-up, and we are sitting literally on the verge of the third release of the college football playoff rankings. Everybody's curious where Notre Dame's going to be, where BYU is going to slip, where Georgia is going to move up, where Tennessee is going to move down. We're all going to find out soon enough. But thanks, guys, for coming in and pinch hitting for Mr. Bender while he coaches his daughters.
Oh, nice.
Basketball game. Yeah.
Nice. We will let it slide. Since he's being a good dad, we'll let it slide that he's not doing the show tonight. We'll let it slide.
He's the best dad, man. He's the best. He really is. So, all right, I want to kick us off with a little Trocchi trivia for both of you guys. And it's going to be easy for the Notre Dame crowd, I think, because I already tried it on my brother and he got it right away. So, and let's not do it at the end of the show because we got a little transition because of the ESPN thing and all that. So you guys can answer right off the bat if you want to. All right, Trocchi trivia. Here we go. Can you name the last year Notre Dame had a one-loss regular season?
The last year, a one-loss regular season? Yeah, it's 2021.
And it was not. I'm not counting the 2020 season where they lost the the ACC championship game.
2021. They went 11-1, finished 5th in the CFB rankings, and lost the bowl game. Yeah, they only lost to Cincinnati that year. Finished 11-1. Yep, number 5, and then they lost to Oklahoma State in the bowl game, Fiesta Bowl.
Right,
which Vince was at. He covered.
I was. It was an awesome first half, really crappy second half.
Yeah. Prior to that, the last time they only lost one game would have to go back to what? 93.
93
season. Yeah.
That is
not a lot of one-loss seasons in Notre Dame. They're either all or nothing, baby. That's how we roll it.
Exactly. So, all right. Well, let's dive in a little bit. Let's talk a little Georgia and Tennessee.
Did your Trocchi trivia meant to be the last time they did that against a real schedule? Because that was the thing about 2020. It was a terrible schedule. So, yeah, I dig that.
So let's talk a little bit about Georgia and Tennessee, the game of the weekend from Week 12. Tennessee jumped up to a 10-0 lead. Carson Beck, took all kinds of abuse leading up to that game. I think every interception was dissected and how badly he was doing this year. And he needs Brock Bowers. And he needs, all the other weapons that they lost from last year. And then he turned it on in the second quarter. I don't know how much you saw of that game, but to me, it looked like he was – I hate to say this because, I'm not inside of it. It looked like he was gaining confidence as it was going. He was nervous. He was pushing the ball. He was aiming it a little bit, and then he hit a couple, and it took off, and then Georgia kind of ran away with it from there. I mean, it was 31-7 over the final 3 quarters of that game.
It started off, Bill, to your point. I think you nailed it. It started off like, here we go again, right? Where he's not comfortable. He's got happy feet. He's rushing his mechanics. He's afraid to make a mistake. He's got all the pressure in the world on him because they can't run the football. Like everybody talks about Carson Beck. Part of the reason he's struggling is because if he doesn't play well, they have no chance because they can't run the ball on anybody competent. They went in that game averaging, I think, was like 132 rushing yards per game and didn't run the ball very well against Tennessee either. They only ran for 100. This is crazy. The last 2 games, Georgia has ran for 165 yards in their last 2 games. They have not rushed for 150 yards in a game, Bill, since the Week 2 game against Tennessee Tech. So he has to play great football. But as you said, he hit a couple throws, and you could just kind of almost see his body language change to where he's like, I got this. And I'm not a big Mike Bobo fan, but I thought Mike Bobo called one of the best games he's ever called. There was a lot of stuff that were getting receivers open. It was getting the tight ends more involved in the offense. It gave him some easier reads and get the ball out quickly. And as he got more comfortable, he got better and better and better and really ripped up Tennessee in the second and third quarters. I mean, he really turned that game completely around.
he let it go. You know what I mean? He wasn't letting it go early. He was just kind of being careful of worrying about that another interception. And then he was letting it go 15 yards downfield in the second half, and that really turned it around. Vince, did you see that game too, or did you?
Sure did. Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And it started out not great for Georgia, obviously, being down 10-0. But even at that point, from the second quarter on, it was all dogs. Like it felt like even though it was tied 17-17 at halftime, it certainly didn't feel like it was tied 17-17, right? And then Georgia pretty much took control in the second half and, obviously shut out Tennessee and that's all she wrote for that one. But it was, if you're a Georgia fan and you were hoping for good things to happen, you were a little nervous there in the first quarter. But Tennessee just couldn't sustain what they were trying to do in the first quarter, and Georgia just kind of took over with their veterans and they've been there. They've been in this situation, and I think that really kind of took over after a little while.
All right, I test for both of you.
Bill,
2 losses.
Sorry, I was to say one more thing. What we saw in that game was the difference between the team who has been in this type of game a lot of times and the team that wasn't. Because when Tennessee got that lead, they kind of puckered up a little bit and it went into let's hold on mode, where once Georgia got the lead, they said, well, we're going to keep going. We're going to keep going, and we're going to put this thing away, because they knew they needed to not only win, but they needed to win impressively to make a statement for this committee. So I thought you saw a little bit of that in that game as well.
Yeah, and they did. All right, 2 loss SEC teams. I test: Texas A&M, Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, Ole Miss. What's your order, BD? 1 to 5. I test
for the entire season.
No, who's the best team?
Who's the best team?
Who do you not want Notre Dame to play?
Well, that's different, because that's more about matchups. The team that I think matches up worst for Notre Dame is the worst matchup is Ole Miss, because they have really dynamic receivers and a great D line. If we're talking like the whole season, I think Ole Miss was probably the most impressive. I mean, they led the entire Kentucky game and then choked that away. That was a bad loss. They led the entire game against LSU. Mm-hmm. And the only time they trailed was in overtime of that game. That's also a bad loss. So they have 2 bad losses, but when they're on, they are as good as anybody in the country, because they can score, they can throw, but their defense is legit. I think they have the best defense in the SEC, and the difference between them and Tennessee, Georgia, and Alabama of the 3, because I put A&M at the bottom from an eye test standpoint, is they have a better secondary than those other teams, because a lot of those teams in the SEC don't have very good secondaries this year, which is wild to me. But I go them 1, I go Bama 2, I go Tennessee 3. Georgia 3, Tennessee 4, A&M 5. That's my.
I was going to say no recency bias for the Dogs. You got the Dogs 3rd there.
Well, because yes, they did great Saturday, but I also remember them getting destroyed the week before. Like, I'm not an AP voter where I just react off the last week, which makes me moronically put LSU ahead of Texas A&M, despite the fact Texas A&M slaughtered them, a week and a half before. But it's the entire season. It's the ugly win over Kentucky, the ugly win over Mississippi State, the ugly win, over Auburn. They just have not played great football. Georgia has looked awesome twice this year, 2.5 times. Texas, Tennessee, and the second half against Clemson. And the rest, they've just kind of been mediocre, where Ole Miss has had 2 bad games and then pretty much smoked everybody after that. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're the only team that smoked out South Carolina. South Carolina's had close losses, except against Ole Miss. And I think Bama's another team. They had about a 3-game stretch where they struggled defensively. But outside of that, I think Bama's been a pretty darn good football team this year, outside of that little 3-game stretch where they lost to Vandy, barely beat South Carolina, and then lost to Tennessee. And they've found their run game again, which has been their key. So that's why I have them number 2. Just consistency matters to me, Bill. Not who you were on your worst day or who you are on your best day, but what were you in between? And in between, Ole Miss and Alabama have just been better than Georgia this year.
Vince, let's talk a little LSU Tigers. They lost last week 27-16 down at the Swamp. The Gators are in kind of disarray. DJ Lagway did come back at quarterback for the Gators. That gave them a lift for sure. LSU has now lost 3 in a row. They lost to Texas A&M by 15, Alabama by 29, and Florida by 11. That's 3 double-digit losses in a row. for the Tigers. We've seen Brian Kelly on the sideline getting into it with players a little bit. Rumors that he's lost the locker room and all that kind of thing. What do you think is going on in Baton Rouge right now?
Whew, man.
Brian Kelly? Really? Brian Kelly losing the locker room?
I know. It's scary. I think that's the biggest concern that you would have if you're an LSU fan is that right there, right? Is that he has lost the locker room and that none of these games that they've got left, I think they've got Vanderbilt next. None of these are gimme games for LSU right now, even though they're hosting. I mean, who would have thought that we would say that Vanderbilt going into Death Valley, probably a night game because that's what happens at LSU, isn't a gimme game for LSU? I think we're legitimately in that spot right now because I think there's a chance he has started to lose this team a little bit. I mean, everybody and their brother saw, Brian Kelly yelling at one of his players, telling him he's uncoachable, all that kind of stuff. And it's unfortunate that was caught on video for Brian Kelly. I will say that much.
It's unfortunate for him.
That's what I'm saying. It's unfortunate.
But he does it so much, it's hard not to catch it on camera.
I know. I get it. I'm just saying, I'm trying to be as neutral as possible here. It's unfortunate for him because that will bleed into the locker room and guys are going to defend their guy. I mean, they're not going to defend the coach on that one. And I worry for Brian Kelly's sake about losing the team and where things stand for them right now. If they go and they lose to Vanderbilt at home this coming week, that's a rough go there for BK.
What's going through Bryce Underwood's mind right now?
They won't. You know what goes through a kid's like Bryce Underwood's mind? This is what elite players are. It won't be like that with me there.
That's fair.
No, seriously, that's what great players do, right? It's like that's fine. I don't care what's going on there because I'm me, and I'm going to have this recruit because they do have an excellent recruiting class coming in. They should. It was a great year in Louisiana. But that's what and that's how most kids are. That's why you don't see a ton of decommitments except when you just the bottom falls out, which to Vince's point could happen if they lose to Vanderbilt. Like right now, it's more like, hey, they still beat Ole Miss. They still beat this team. They still had this good win. With me there, hey, we're going to do this.
Change it. We'll change the
right. We'll change
story.
I mean, are the Michigan rumors with Bryce Underwood dying down out there or what? Like it seemed like it was an any minute kind of thing that he was going to flip and then he didn't.
And that's why I don't think he is, because I think he was considering it because, again, you start getting closer to going from Belleville, Michigan to Baton Rouge, Louisiana and away from your mom and dad. It gets a little bit tougher when you get closer to that. And there was a need at Michigan, and it's the in-state school, and I do think he was considering it. But once the Michigan people started releasing it, like, "Hey, we offered him $10.5 million, and he's going to take it," then it made it seem like that's all he was going to go there for. And from what I was told from a couple sources, LSU was not the top offer for him. He didn't pick LSU because they offered him the most money. He picked LSU because I don't know, I'm a top quarterback, and I have a brain and eyes, and I watched Joe Burrow and Jaden Daniels the last 5 years, and I think, hey, I want to be that guy. Even though I hate to break it to you, Bryce, but you're not going to be that guy with Brian Kelly because it's Brian Kelly. But that kind of, for what I was told, that really turned the family off, that the Michigan people kept making it seem like we bought him. And he's like, we're not for sale.
Right.
Yes, the money would have been nice, but I think they kind of blew that a little bit, to be honest with you.
That's interesting. So, I think the recruiter, I mean, his buyout, I don't think Kelly's on the hot seat, even if they lose the next two games.
The buyout's $60 million. Like that's
right. The buyout.
That state, that's a very poor state. And in my opinion, and you got a $20+ million payroll you got to meet next week. Like, and it's not just $60 million, Bill. It's $60 million for him, but his assistants have buyouts as well. And honestly, he shouldn't be on the hot seat. He's accomplished enough in his career. If you take away my disdain for the guy, he's accomplished enough of it in his career, including his first 2 years at LSU, to say, hey, you had a down year. And if you're Brian Kelly, you're going to say, hey, look, we went through this at Notre Dame. We had a 4-8 season in 2016, and the wheels fell off a little bit, but we rebounded. I made some hires. We did this, this, and this. Well, he'll say he made hires, but in reality,
he's won everywhere he's been.
He has.
He's won at multiple places, multiple leagues, multiple levels, multiple everything. So one more topic before we jump into the top 25 reveal on ESPN. See what the latest bracket looks like. Colorado is suddenly tied for first place in the Big 12. Unbelievable.
Wow.
I was a doubter. I'm not afraid to admit it.
So was I.
And Coach Prime has got them primed to get into the Big 12 championship game at least. The Utah game they didn't play their best game, and they still won by 20, 25 points or whatever it was. I mean, Shedeur is just getting it done. My colleague Bill Bender likes Shedeur more than Travis Hunter, thinks he's a better player than Travis Hunter. And you watch their offensive line, it's just not good. And Shedeur is still making plays. Their receivers are very talented, and he's getting the ball. So that, what do you think, Vince, about Colorado? And, I don't think they're going to get in at large, but what do you think their chances are to win the league and get in?
Yeah, I think the Big 12 is a one bid league at this point, along with the ACC. So, you got to win your conference championship. And they positioned themselves to be in the conference title game against right now BYU, pending something crazy with BYU down the stretch. And right now, I think Colorado's more dynamic than BYU is. I think BYU might be the better all around, team, right? But Colorado's dynamic. They could potentially big play BYU in a couple of different spots. And they're athletic. They're very athletic, obviously, at the skill positions. The trenches are going to be an issue for Colorado, obviously. Yeah. Their offensive line is really, really bad. And if BYU can take advantage of that, then they've got a shot at winning that conference game. But, man, can you imagine the hype that's going to surround the Big 12 championship game with Prime and everybody else and everything that comes with Colorado, right?
Warren Sapp, baby. Let's go.
Oh, man. Yeah, that's right. He's on the staff too. Like, can you imagine everything going into this? And right now, I would probably say that Colorado is going this way and BYU is kind of going this way. And so if they meet, I would probably give Colorado the edge. But then once they get into the playoff, I think it's going to be tough sledding for Colorado. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Keep an eye on the two hottest teams in the Big 12 right now are Colorado and Arizona State.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Arizona State has something to say.
They host BYU this weekend.
Yeah. Quarterback Sam Levitt made a wise life choice, transferring from East Lansing, Michigan to
Scattaboo, baby. Scattaboo.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that kid.
So, all right. Well, that's our wrap for Week 12, and we will be back to break down the college football playoff ranking show right after this. All right, we're back. Welcome in to the CFB Nation All-America podcast, or welcome back if you are watching live on our YouTube channel. I'm Bill Trocchi, senior editor at sportingnews.com, along with Bryan, Driskell, and Vince DeDario of Irish Breakdown. We got a couple of strong arms off the bench. We got Bender out coaching middle school girls basketball. We got Driskell flexing. We got Vince ready to break everything down.
Enjoying it all.
Good show. It's going to be live. Brian's going to be telling us why everybody is they got the seating's wrong.
No, I've only had beef with one.
This committee doesn't know what they're doing. I need to be on the committee. I'm Brian Driskell.
Well, first of all, I should be on the committee, but I had beef with one team primarily last week, and that was Penn State. That's it.
You'll still have beef with them this week.
Most of it correctly. Penn State's the one they got wrong. Yeah,
I think that's the one they got wrong. I want to, ask your wife if you tell when you're sleeping. Do you talk in your sleep? Penn State is overrated. Penn State is overrated while you're sleeping.
No, it's assumed in my house. It's assumed. We know this. Yeah, we just have to let the rest of the world know that Penn State's overrated.
So anyway, we talked a little bit on our last show. We think the ACC is a one bid league. We think the Big 12 is a one big league.
It's trending.
I'm not sold on the ACC just yet being a one big league, but they're pretty close to it.
They're trending in that direction.
Yeah. Notre Dame, barring an upset, is safely inside the at-large field. Okay.
Agreed.
So at least 6
really ugly wins. That would be the other thing, is if they win the next 2 games and they look crappy doing it, then I could see them maybe justifying dropping them down a little bit.
Mm-hmm. That leaves 6 at-large bids, okay, and that left for the Big Ten and the SEC to divvy up, right? So the SEC champ's in, the Big Ten champ is in. So of the 6 bids left, I think the SEC and the Big Ten expect 3 and 3.
Yeah, probably going to split those right now, yeah.
But there could be a 4-2 split to the SEC. Yeah,
that's possible.
If things fall the way they might fall. Indiana might get blown out on Saturday. Their resume is a little flimsy. Obviously, everybody knows that as far as strength of schedule and things like that. So, I don't know. Vince, what do you think about that split? Do you see almost certainly it's going to be 3-3 that we know the Big Ten teams, right?
Sure.
We got, Penn State, Oregon, Ohio State, and Indiana. the SEC, there's more, right? There's no one even under consideration, but the SEC has
Right.
more teams under consideration.
Correct.
That they can get in there.
They've got it. They're on the bubble. There's a bunch of SEC teams on the bubble right now.
Yeah.
For sure. I think the rankings are about to come up, so I don't want to
They
jump
are.
on Bryan.
They are.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No,
Here we
Vince, go ahead, because they're releasing them now. I'll get to those here.
So basically, Bill, right now, I think it's going to be an even split 3-3, but there's still obviously some college football to be played where I think the Big Ten could mess some things up for themselves here moving forward. And if that's the case, then I think if it's going to be a 4-2, I think the SEC gets the 4, the Big Ten gets the 2. It just depends on kind of how things shake up at the top of this thing.
Yeah, one of the debates could be Indiana against Tennessee, right?
Yeah.
And I'll be curious. Yeah. I mean, Indiana's whole season comes down to Saturday. Those 4
Oh,
games.
yeah.
They don't get the benefit of the doubt. They don't get to say, oh, we had a bad week. They don't get forgiven. Like, this is it. They are under observation from the opening kickoff for the whole 60 minutes.
And I think that's a great point that you're making, because I think that nobody's really looking at IU's resume right now. They're just an undefeated Big Ten team, and that's why they are where they are. If they take a loss here, now you start looking at their resume, and I think there's going to be some scrutiny there, right? And especially if they win, if they lose big to Ohio State, then they're really going to be analyzing that resume, and they could fall kind of to the bubble area of the rankings. I could definitely see that happen for sure, because now you got to start comparing them to other teams, right? Right now they're up there by themselves, they're undefeated, fine. But then when you start comparing things, you're going to start comparing them to 2-loss SEC teams. You're going to compare them to a Penn State, a Notre Dame, right? A Miami. Their resume just doesn't hold up to me, right? And so I think they could potentially drop into that bubble area.
We got a lot of time to get into that after the rankings. Can we dive into this? Because there's some wild stuff going on, guys. So far they have released all the way to 17. So I'm going to get all of us caught up on that. So 25 is the Illinois Fighting Illini at 7-3. At 24 is the UNLV Running Rebs at 8-2. 23 is the Missouri Tigers. I still have no clue how they're ranked.
Wow.
Right. They are in at 7-3. Iowa State is back in at 8-2. Arizona State jumped in all the way up to 21. They're 8-2. 20 is the Tulane Green Wave at 9-2. And 19 is the Army Black Knights at 9-0. Wow. So that's huge for Notre Dame. And both of those teams have clinched AAC championship berths. Number 18 is the South Carolina Gamecocks, who are one of the hotter teams in college football right now. Number 17 is the Clemson Tigers. Number 16 is the Colorado Buffaloes at 8-2. And then number 15 is the Texas A&M Aggies, who are stayed at number 15 after beating New Mexico State. BYU falls all the way down to number 14, fellas. So they are now within striking distance of the – if you look at BYU is going to be the highest ranked Big 12 team. Colorado's next at 16. Arizona State's at 21. Wow. Tulane and Army are at 20 and 19. There is a decent chance, especially if Tulane wins that league, of the champion jumping up ahead of the Big 12 champ. Because if BYU loses – this weekend, it's going to make it even tougher.
So that means SMU is going to be ranked above BYU.
SMU is 13th right now. Obviously have the better loss, but the worse win since BYU beat them. And so BYU falls from number 6 all the way down to number 14. Eight spots. And they lost to a 3-6 Kansas team, which I kind of understand, but that was a bad loss. So you have SMU at 13, so they're obviously out. They're going to be the number 2 ACC team. So that is the rankings. Number 12 is the Boise State Broncos, which means that Tennessee is going to remain in at least in the top 11 for now. So Boise State is in at number 12.
But they could be the first team out. Tennessee could be the first team out at this point because both Big 12 and the Group of 5 are going to lead
the next 2 teams now. Could potentially get, or at least one of the next 2 teams, because Boise's still in the top 12. They would, they'd be in. Tennessee is number 11. So as of right now, the Tennessee Volunteers would not be in the college football playoff. I don't believe. They're out. Correct?
They're the first team out.
We'll have to do the math because Boise's still in. So actually, no, they'd be the They'd be out because Boise would have to stay above them. Yeah, they'd be out.
Boise State
Georgia
right
is
now
at
is the number 4.
Guys, Georgia's at number 10.
What?
So Georgia's number 10. I'm telling you, Bill, they had 2 good weekends, and the committee knows that. Number 9 is the Ole Miss Rebels.
They're keeping them the same order, Bryan.
Number 9. I think, that's what I said in the show the other night, Vince. They were just going to take that whole block of SEC teams, move them up, and drop Tennessee at the bottom. That's exactly what I said the other day.
Same way.
Yep. So number 8 is getting released now. They're getting ready to pull that one up.
Alabama.
That's what I think. Miami.
Really?
The Miami Hurricanes are number 8. So Bama has leaped Miami. So now it comes down to where's Notre Dame and where's Bama. They're going to be 6 and 7. I have a feeling they're going to leap Alabama over Notre Dame. Watch. Wow. Number 7, the Alabama Crimson Tide. So Notre Dame stays above the SEC teams. We'll have a lot to say about that here in a little bit. But I'm going to say Notre Dame's probably 6, and then the top 5 stays the same.
Top 5
you guys agree with that?
I absolutely.
There's no reason to. Nothing happened last weekend to move any of those. If you thought Penn State was number 4 last weekend, they blew out Purdue. They should stay there. Notre Dame is number 6. There's no reason to drop Penn State after. If you believe what they were last week, then there's no reason to drop them down now after a 39-point win over Purdue. Now, what I could see is them leaping Penn State over Texas. Indiana's number 5 because Texas struggled with Arkansas. I don't think they will, but who knows? Number 5 is Indiana, guys, at 10-0. Let's see here. So they're going to talk about Indiana for a second. So real quick, while they're talking about that, Bill, initial thoughts on the you look like you had some feelings on the order of the SEC. No, I mean in a good way. It's
absolutely
on the SEC teams, like where they have
Bama
7, Ole Miss 9, Georgia 10, Tennessee 11.
I thought Georgia should be higher. I thought Georgia would be the highest of the Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia, Tennessee cluster. I thought I would have put Georgia first. Their schedule is so much harder than everybody else's, and they look good last week. And, I probably had some bias. I was down in Tuscaloosa for that second half rally that they put together. That was just insane. Even though that was one of their 2 losses, they really looked good in person and in a tough place, tough environment. I also went to the Georgia-Clemson game at the beginning of the year. They dominated Clemson there. And so just to me, they've got the hardest schedule. A lot of people would have 2 losses with that schedule, and I probably would have had them higher. That's my reaction on the SEC.
Top 5, we were correct, guys. It did remain the same. It's Indiana 5, Penn State 4, Texas 3, Ohio State 2, and Oregon number 1. So, Bill, how would you like us to discuss? We can talk about the Georgia thing, but whatever, Bill, wherever you want to take this, man. Let's.
Well, it's interesting. So I got the AP right in front of me, and the AP and the committee rankings are very, very similar. I mean, like right all the way down. 23, 24, 25 are a little bit different, but once you get to 22, same, 21, same, 20, same, 19 and 18 are flipped. 17 is the same, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12. They're all the same. So it's interesting. The one difference is that Georgia is 10 with the committee. They're 8 with the AP. And Miami is 8 with the committee and 11 with AP. Those are really the only differences. 1 through 7 are the same. So it's interesting. Usually there's some differences between the AP and the committee, but at least 1 through 7, they perfectly line up this week.
I think the thing with Georgia at number 12 or at number 10 is the committee still understands that this is not about what you did in the most recent game. The coaches poll, the AP poll, they look at the recency. So they'll ignore, and they did it twice. They did it, and the committee has been consistent with this. Remember, Bill, 3 weeks ago when A&M beat LSU, and then a week later they lose to South Carolina, the AP and the coaches both put LSU ahead of Texas A&M, even though Texas A&M had better losses at the time and better wins. And then but the committee kept A&M ahead of LSU. And then the same thing this week where Georgia has a big win a week after getting blown out by Ole Miss. I mean, that was not a close game. It was a completely dominant performance by Ole Miss. The AP and the coaches poll react to the most recent game where the committee says, big picture, over the course of the entire season, Ole Miss has been the better football team. And I think that Georgia's getting dinged. Like every school has to me, except for Oregon right now, has a black mark. Oregon, Ohio State, because I think losing on the road by a point to the number one team is not a black mark. But Penn State's got a black mark. Texas has a black mark. No, those two teams haven't played tough schedules, no great wins. Indiana doesn't have a black mark. Well, has a black mark because they haven't played anybody. I'm not super convinced by that argument just yet. Notre Dame has a big black mark because they lost to Northern Illinois. We go down the line. The black mark for Texas is, yes, you have a tough schedule, but I don't think Georgia's being dinged because of the two losses. I think Georgia's being dinged because in a lot of those other games, they've looked kind of just okay. I think that's the thing that's hurt them, where in Ole Miss and like Alabama and a lot of their wins, Bama smacks people. I mean, they went on the road and blew Wisconsin out, who just took the number one team in the country down to the wire. Ole Miss is, South Carolina either beat you or almost beat you, but except against Ole Miss, who beat them, I think, 29-7. So I do think they're doing a decent job of taking the whole picture into view and looking just beyond the win-loss record, but also diving into how you play. And Georgia has a great resume. There's no doubt if you just look at the teams, who they beat and all that. But at some point in time, you've got to look at how they play. And I think that right now, Ole Miss has been a much better team more consistently than what Georgia has. And they've kind of they're similar to Notre Dame. They're 8-2. None of their wins are by single digits. Every single win they've had has been a double-digit win. And They led almost the entire game in the two games they lost. And I think that matters. Plus, again, there's the head-to-head aspect where they smacked Georgia just a week and a half ago.
Vince,
don't forget.
What do you think, Vince? What do you think if this bracket holds? We got an SEC team going up to South Bend, an SEC team going to State College, an SEC team going up to Bloomington.
Yeah.
And BYU going to Columbus in December. There's going to be a run on mittens in the Midwest.
I'll tell you what, Ole Miss is the one that gets out of jail free card on this one.
And whoever sells warm weather clothes or cold weather clothes in the South, Vince, we're buying stock in that company right now.
Bloomington is like a heat wave in comparison to all these other places, right? I mean, they're in southern Indiana, so it's going to be the warmest possible there. But on December 20th or 21st, all four of those games, the way it's laid out right now, you got to give the home team a little credit because they're used to playing that kind of stuff. Look, if you're a Notre Dame fan, and obviously we're Notre Dame guys, if you're a Notre Dame fan, you welcome the SEC team to come up to South Bend on December 21st. But yeah, look, all those teams are going to, I'm not going to say they're automatically going to struggle because it's cold, but that does help the home team. I mean, no doubt about it. That's why out of this 12-team format, I do like the first round home games. I do like that bit because, bringing that excitement to a campus and all that stuff, I think is awesome. And then it also gives, look, all the bowl games for obvious reasons are in the South, right? They're on the road. Anybody in the North is on the road, and they've got to deal with that. And so I like the fact that if you're a good enough team to host, that at least you get to host at your own place the first round. I dig that. And right now it's pretty funny that they're all Midwest teams that are hosting.
I love it. I love this format. So I don't want to sound like I'm banging on it. I'm excited for it. I think like the 12 team is a perfect size. I always thought that, people thought it's really an 11 team field when you think about the group of five. So it's like all these programs that think, oh, we'll make the playoff. No problem. The expanded playoff every year. And like, guess what? There's about 20 programs that think they should make an 11 team field every single year.
Agreed.
And it's difficult. It's harder than you think to make this field. The one big issue I've said it a million times, is the seeding. And the seeding, being not 1 through 12 like they do the NCAA basketball tournament. I'm fine with the automatic bids, but I still wish they'd just go 1 through 12 and put them in the bracket 1 through 12. Because like you said, there is a huge advantage into playing at home or on the road, right? And it's the committee that is deciding, like that Notre Dame, Alabama is 8-9 right now. Like they're splitting hairs at 8-9. They just are, right?
Yeah.
And however they split those hairs, one team gets a huge advantage and one team doesn't. Right. That's a little bit of a bummer with this format, I think.
But I think, what, Bill, I'll say this because I do want to dive into the rankings, but I'll say this. But that is exactly why I got it wrong when they initially announced they were going to 12. Because what I said was, and Vince, you and I did the show together, I said it's going to ruin the regular season. And it actually has enhanced it. And it's enhanced it because teams that are Notre Dame fans and Bama fans our season would have been over. Notre Dame's in week 2. And Bama's would have been over after they lost their second game to Tennessee. It's like, okay, well, what do we got to play for now? Because now it's like you're splitting hairs, but that adds so much to, well, Notre Dame and Penn State could be jockeying for a position in 2 weeks. And it's going to come down to, okay, we played Purdue, we played USC, you played Purdue, you played USC. Who looked better? I mean, those are the type of conversations we're going to be having. And when you talk about like Georgia, we talk about like, man, Georgia has the second best win in all of college football, in my opinion. Georgia does, by going on the road and beating Texas. The best win being Oregon beating Ohio State, if we're just going off of where teams are ranked, right? And say, well, shouldn't that give them some merit? And they played a really tough, they played a brutal schedule, but they haven't looked good a lot. And so how are you splitting hairs? It's like, okay, well, how are you playing? And I think that's what's so fascinating about this. And the bigger storyline, and we maybe could get into this later in the week, Bill, or maybe next week, but the SEC is being punished for actually scheduling their top teams to play each other, where the Big Ten avoided that for the most part. Now, I don't count Indiana because no one thought they would be that. But, Bill, and you and I were talking about this before the show. The fact that Penn State went into the season not having to play Oregon, not having to play Michigan. Yeah, they got Washington and Ohio State, but like, you knew Washington wasn't going to be that good this year. I mean, everybody knew that. And that's the thing, is where the SEC has given their teams 3-4 really tough games, except for Texas. The Big Ten said, hey, look, we're going to go out there and we're going to kind of, except for Ohio State, give them sort of manageable schedules and call it a day. And the SEC has a lot better non-conference games than what the most of the Big Ten at the top scheduled. I mean, Ohio State's non-conference schedule is a joke. Right. Oregon at least played Boise. I guess that's good. And then Penn State played West Virginia. Like, even if West Virginia was good as it was last year, that's a mediocre Big 12 team, which is the worst of the Power 4 leagues. Right. And they were worse than the Big Pac-12 in football. They were better money-wise, clearly, but they were worse in football. And so, I mean, whereas the Big Ten, I mean, the SEC, I mean, Georgia played Clemson, Texas A&M played Notre Dame, Texas went on the road and played Michigan, which when you play Michigan, you're trying to schedule, even though they weren't as good as they were, you're trying to schedule a good game if you do that. Alabama went on the road to Wisconsin this season, you know what I mean? Which is a quality, it's a quality game.
Especially so that's when you win by 40.
Right. And that's the thing, is the SEC tried to say, hey, we're going to schedule, we're going to get our top teams are going to have to play each other. The top teams then chose to go out and schedule. I mean, LSU playing USC, things like that. Ole Miss didn't really challenge themselves. Tennessee playing NC State's a quality, it's a quality game of bordering states. So right. That's the thing to me that I do think.
In Texas's defense, Michigan, like you said, that road trip out there, Oklahoma is supposed to be good. They're not good. Florida,
their schedule's soft, like Notre Dame's schedule is not as good, because teams that you thought were going to be good turned out not to be good. If Florida State, right. Notre Dame. If Florida State and USC were typical Florida State or USC teams, we're talking about Notre Dame having one of the toughest schedules in the country, because you started at A&M, you ended at USC. And same thing, that's a good point, Bill. Texas, Texas tried.
They got Georgia, they got Michigan, they got Oklahoma, they got Florida on their schedule, and like two of them ended up, being,
and A&M on the road at the end of the year, right?
That was just like, bad luck for them for the scheduling wise. So
right.
Yeah. So what matchup jumps out to you, Vince, in that first round that you think is one that's maybe more must-see TV than the others?
Well, right now, obviously, we are pre-Ohio State IU, right? And right now, to me, that Ole Miss IU game would stand out. I would love to see Ole Miss come up to Bloomington and play the Hoosiers in that first round. Now, I don't think we're going to be lucky enough to get that after this weekend, but as of right now, looking at it, Ole Miss IU, man, I think that would be a fun one to watch, because I think IU is a lot of offense and not a lot of defense. And I think, Ole Miss obviously has a really good offense, but they also have a defense to come with it. So, where the fireworks going to be, what is that going to look like? I think that'd be a fun one.
The one
Brian,
thing I disagree with so
fan.
far. Go ahead.
I got a question for you, Brian. If I'm an Indiana fan, how should I feel tonight? How should I feel about that ranking?
Feel
and
good right
can
now.
It withstand a loss to Ohio State?
I think it can, if it's a close four. I mean, look, the entire resume for Penn State is we had a close loss at home to Ohio State. That's the now they've got a top 25 win now because Illinois jumped back in. The committee did a little favor for Penn State because they probably heard all the people like me saying they've beaten no one. And Illinois is going to lose again, so they'll fall out. But their entire resume being number 4 is based on what? They played Ohio State, quote unquote, competitively. I don't agree with that, for 4 quarters. So if Indiana goes to Columbus and plays that game, and it's a good 4-quarter game, and Ohio State wins by a touchdown at the end, then Indiana should fall and travel in the first round, but they should still be in, in my opinion. Because the thing about Indiana that everybody keeps talking about who they played, but it's kind of like at some point in time, you got to say, okay, the schedule is what it is, right? I mean, they were handed most of their schedule. Yes, they could have played somebody tough for non-conference, but if you're Indiana, you're thinking, well, we weren't thinking we were going to turn this around this quickly. But the thing about Indiana is they have not just won games. They're blowing people out. I mean, they've had one game this season that was less than 2 touchdown difference. And that matters to me. So if people say, well, they're overrated. They may be. I mean, I don't think Indiana's the 5th best team in college football. They may deserve to be there now, but I don't think they are. But if they prove us wrong this weekend and they actually play like a top 5 team, then they deserve to be in. Yeah. But I think that you're going to get dinged because it's like, I think Notre Dame is one of the 5 best teams in college football right now. I mean, the last 2 months, Notre Dame's not only beating people, they're destroying people. We complained about them not playing great on Saturday night in a game where they beat a team who's a win away from a bowl game and they were up 35-0. And we're like, yeah, because they're killing people. But they don't deserve to be ranked in the top 5 right now because they did lose to Northern Illinois at home back on September 7th. I mean, your whole season has to matter. And the fact that Indiana did play a softer schedule should means that they don't belong as having a home game if they lose to Ohio State in a competitive game. But I do think that they would have a strong enough resume to say that they belong in. I don't know that the committee will agree with me because they have them below Penn State, which I don't know how they're below Penn State. But I think that they should be. If it's a legitimately good game where it's toe-to-toe, back and forth.
That's really key.
Because it's not like Ohio State's up 14, Penn State scores to make it, or Indiana scores to make it 7. Ohio State goes back up 14 and then 17, and then Penn State scores, or Indiana scores a field goal and then scores a late touchdown with a minute left to make it a 7-point game. That's like if they play Ohio State like Louisville played Notre Dame, that does not tell me that they're a legitimate team because Notre Dame dominated that game. No matter what the score said, Vince, you and I were in the stadium. There was never a threat like, oh, gee, Louisville might win. Mm-mm. You know what I mean? Like if it's that type of game, then I don't know if I keep them in, Bill, to be honest with you. But if it's a legitimate back and forth game where, it's like, boy, if this breaks this way, that breaks that way, man, what a great game. Then I do think that they will have proven that they're a top. To me, they would have a better case than Penn State because I think if they played right now on a neutral field and I had to bet on that game, just straight up, I'm taking Indiana because Indiana actually has a good defense. That's where I'll disagree with you a little bit, Vince. Their defense has been pretty good this year. And, they've only given up more than 17 points twice all year. And, it's not like Penn State and Notre Dame's and those type of teams, but I think their offense is better than Penn State's by a greater margin than Penn State's defense is better than Indiana's defense.
Okay, last question for you for tonight for these rankings. Okay, Tennessee is basically the first team out among the at-large. They're ready to jump back in if somebody messes up in front of them. They don't really have opportunities to get big wins in their last 2 weeks, but they are there. Now, here's my question. SMU is kind of the next team out, right? But if they play in the ACC championship game and they beat Miami, is Miami an at-large? They are 8 right now. I think Miami, let's say Miami goes 11-1, and then they pick up that second loss. Do they stay inside the field?
So we've been told that the conference championship games aren't going to drop somebody out, right? Unfortunately, if Miami picks up their second loss, especially if it's an ugly loss, if Cam Ward just can't keep it close and he can't, do what he needs to do to help out his defense and, things of that nature, right? I think they do fall out because now you're looking at a 2-loss Miami team that I don't think anybody in their right mind would look at that block of SEC teams sitting there with 2 losses and say Miami's better than them. I just don't think that would happen. That would be the only case right now that I can think of that is going to drop a conference championship participant loser out. I really do.
I mean, they don't have a ranked team on their schedule.
Yeah, I don't like it.
BD, you're muted.
Yeah. We talk a lot about at Irish Breakdown about how the Louisville game losing to Stanford hurt Notre Dame. It hurt Miami way worse because Miami had a road win over a top 20 team last week. Here's the thing that could save them a little bit. It's not out of possibility that Syracuse jumps into the top 25 next week if they beat UConn, because they would be 8-3. There's going to be some teams losing. That might be what they do to kind of help Miami, because if Miami goes on, if they beat Wake Forest this weekend, I think they'll blow Wake Forest out. If they go on the road and beat an 8-3 Syracuse team, that may be enough to say, hey, listen, if we're not going to punish people for being in the conference championship games, because I don't think you can just do that blanket wise. I think you need to say we have to use some discretion.
Right.
You know what I mean? There are certain leagues like the Big Ten. I would ding the loser more than I would the SEC, because the SEC, they already went through the gauntlet. It's the Big Ten. It's like, depending on who's in it. Like if Penn State gets in the Big Ten title game, let's say Ohio State, let's say Indiana beats Ohio State beats Indiana and Michigan beats Ohio State, and somehow, some way, Penn State's in and they get smacked by Oregon, they're out for me, because you played two playoff caliber teams, one at home, one on neutral field, and they both kicked your butt, really, and outplayed you thoroughly. But if like Georgia, let's say somehow Georgia gets into the SEC title game and they lose in a rematch against Texas by a touchdown, I'm not punishing Georgia. I'm not knocking them out for that.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because of the schedule they played. So it just depends on who it is. I might ding Ole Miss more than I would Georgia or Bama, because I don't think their schedule's been as hard. That's kind of how I look at it.
The Miami example just illustrates the seeding. We're talking about if they beat SMU in the ACC championship game, they're a 3 seed. If they lose, they're out of the tournament. You're either a 3 or you're out of the tournament. What are we doing here? What are we talking about over one game?
I don't know that they're necessarily done, though. I think it depends on, like, if they just go out. See, here they might be. Here's the thing about Miami. They got to absolutely obliterate their next two opponents. Like, that's the thing for Miami. They can't. If Miami has 2 close games in the next 2 weeks against Wake Forest and Syracuse, teams that not many people are going to respect, then you know what? They should kind of drop out if they lose to SMU.
Yeah.
But if Miami just whoops their next 2 opponents, because Miami can say, hey, listen, hold on a second. Let's talk about this game you had against Florida there, Bulldogs, where you won by 14 and it was tied in the fourth quarter, because we played Florida at Florida and destroyed them. You know what I mean? So that's the thing that Miami can have if they blow out the next 2 teams. I think if the ACC wants to get 2 teams in, the best chance they have is Miami crushes their next 2 opponents, and SMU Miami playing a shootout that comes down to the wire. If Miami beats SMU, SMU's done. I mean, they should be. They don't have the kind of they just don't have that kind of resume where Miami can say, look, we went on the road, played an SEC team that gave Tennessee trouble, gave Georgia trouble, beat LSU, and we destroyed them. And that's why I think Miami might have a case. But Bill, where they are, it's going to be tough to see them not, because they only got to fall really 3 spots to get out. I think they will.
And the committee dropped them a spot, kind of putting them behind Alabama already. So I'm wondering, they're interviewing Ward Manuel right now. I'm wondering kind of how they feel about Miami, period. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like they think Miami's all that great of a team just based on what they're doing. Like, weren't they on a bye this past week?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And they're getting passed up. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I don't know that the committee really gives a whole lot of respect to Miami right now.
Watch out for Coach Fran in that finale, too. Coach Fran
knows.
Can I
say something real quick, guys? I want to say something. He's done a great job there, by the way, this season. I want to say something real quick. We are responding to us of what we've been told about how a championship games won't hurt teams. I think they should, though. Because if you want and Brandon Plesner made this point, if you want the reward of having a win getting you a bye, then you should have the risk of it knocking you out.
Right.
I mean, and if you don't want that to happen, then here's a crazy thought. Don't play the conference championships anymore. Because the only reason to play those now, Bill, in a 12 to 14 team playoff era is for money. You don't need to have a champion anymore in an 18-team league where most of the teams don't play each other. So there's no point in having it other than just we want to make the money off of the ACC off of the championship game or the SEC or Big Ten championship game. Right. So if you 100%. If you want the reward of getting a bye for winning your league, then you need to take, and this is Brandon made a great point on this, and you need to be willing to accept the fact that if you're 10 or 11 and you lose that, guess what? Your resume now has a third loss on it or a bad second loss on it. So but what we're saying is we were told that it won't impact them negatively a whole lot, which is why we responded the way that we did.
I mean,
I'm not saying that I necessarily agree with that because all those games count.
Georgia went from 1-6 last year, but losing a 3-point game to Alabama in the SEC championship game. Right. They went from number 1 undefeated to out of the tournament. Now,
and you know what? And
it didn't hurt anybody worse than Florida State.
Well, and I don't know that this is still the same. These are still the same people that are making these decisions. And so they can say all they want, right? You know what I mean? It's still the committee. It's still the CFP committee, right? They can say all they want going in that, oh, well, playing in the championship game is not going to hurt you, whatever. There's still reality. And there's still the eyeball test. There's still resumes. There's still all of these different things. And fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you want to look on it, that block of SEC teams right now that are all sitting there with 2 losses and they've all kind of beaten each other, right? That is a detriment to everybody else in the country right now. Mm-hmm. It just is, because that's like, the big blue wave and all the whatever analogy that you want to use, right? Like that's going to be tough for some of these teams to overcome because either you jump the whole group or you fall behind the whole group. Like that's how I feel that group is right now. And somehow Miami kind of got in there a little bit between Alabama and Ole Miss, but I feel like that's kind of an impenetrable block of teams right now.
It's going to be hard. Hey, Bill, I got a question for you. Do you think that it will have a greater impact? I know what they've told us, but do you think that how the game is played will have a greater impact? Like if Georgia goes in and loses to Texas in a barn burner, great game, that may not have an impact. But if Texas beats them by 14 and they're clearly better, that actually might? Do you think that they're just going to say, hey, we're going to take the SEC loser no matter what?
No, I think so. And I don't think as much with the SEC. I think the ACC game that we were talking about before was maybe the one. If SMU handles Miami, they're going to get punished for it.
No brainer.
I mean? If it's a close game, just like you said. Then so SEC, I can't imagine. It looks like it's going to be Texas, Alabama. I think both teams will be safely in, even if they lose that one. So, and then the Big Ten, it looks like, Oregon's, we know it's going to be Oregon, and it'll probably be Ohio State. So they're both going to be in too. Big 12, it's winner take all. So I think it only, as far as the beauty contest game, championship game, I think it's going to be the ACC. If it ends up being Miami and SMU and Miami, both teams just have one loss when they're heading into that. So anyway, all right, guys, this was fun. I got some sportingnews.com responsibilities I need to jump on top of. Thank you very much for your insights. Thanks to Irish Breakdown, your source for Notre Dame football information. The CFB Nation All-America podcast will be back later this week to pick our Week 13 games, break them all down, and then we'll move on. We'll be one data point closer. Bryan, you got something?
And we're going live at 8 o'clock at Irish Breakdown to dive more into the Notre Dame aspects of this. We'll talk more big picture, Bill, but 8 o'clock at IB folks. Go over to Irish Breakdown. If you're here and you're not a Notre Dame fan, come on over because we'll have plenty to talk about. But Bill, you guys plan on doing this again next week? You guys plan on going live again next week? Awesome.
Should be here.
Fun.
Yeah.
It'll be a lot of
great.
fun.
All right.
This weekend is going to be the final big say on the rankings. That's what's going to make this a lot of fun. So thanks, Bill.
All right. Thanks, guys.